Our lives as Christians can sure be overwhelming at times. It's in those moments when we can choose to respond in fear and try to overcome our problems with our own effort, with our own strength and resources. But as followers of Jesus, when we face great challenges, we need to trust all the more in our great God. And remember, you might be a little afraid, but this world of darkness and sin has no hope, and that world is full of fear. Believe me, they may not seem like it, but this fallen world, people are full of fear. This world can be overcome by the fear of something as simple as a tumbling loaf of barley bread. Previously, in Judges, we read about the Lord visiting Gideon. Gideon, if you recall in Judges 6, was ordered to smash his father's idols, the idols to Baal and Asherah. And he obeyed. And when he did so, Gideon earned a new name, Jerubbaal, meaning let Baal or let Baal defend himself. And it's sort of sarcastic, right? Because he can't, because he's an idol. Gideon's bold action led to him becoming a mighty judge of Israel and a military leader. Now that he had gained some fame and notoriety for obeying the Lord and doing what needed to be done, he was in a position where men would listen to him, and he was ready to overthrow Midian's control of Israel. Our reading this morning covers Judges 7, verses 1 through 25. And I know that sounds a lot, but I assure you, I am just going to not do a lot of exposition. So don't worry, well, it won't take too long. But I just wanted to get the big picture. We'll start with Judges 7, 1 through 5. And this is a story many of you know well. Judges 7, 1 through 5. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Herod. And the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh and the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands. For Israel would become boastful, saying, 'My own power has delivered me.' Now therefore come, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, 'Whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead.' So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, 'The people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Therefore it shall be that he of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, he shall go with you. But every one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go.' So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, 'You shall separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, as well as everyone who kneels to drink.'" Now, before I go on, I just want to point out that I can't help but when I think of this story, I tend to think that I misremember it. You know, as if the Lord is saying, whoever cups with his hand will go with you. But he doesn't say that. He just says, have them do that, then I'll tell you. And I think the idea is whatever the minority is, whatever the lower number is. So we'll find out. So he doesn't tell them ahead of time. Now, the size of the Midianite army was approximately 135,000 soldiers. That's the estimated strength of their army. Gideon only had a total, right, of 32,000 soldiers just to begin with. If that much smaller army beat the army of 135,000, so 100,000 people more plus, you might be tempted to think that's a miracle, right? Or at least an incredible military victory. Maybe they employed some kind of very impressive, intricate strategy in one. Still, it may not be a miracle. Like I said, maybe it was just some good strategy and some luck. Maybe then that smaller army could win. Maybe they had some traps set, and maybe it wouldn't be a miracle. So the Lord made sure to reduce that number, right, to 10,000 brave soldiers. But they're the brave ones, right? Gideon said, anyone who's afraid, you can go home. I'm surprised that many stayed. You're already vastly outnumbered. There's a good chance you're going to die. But down to 10,000, they were the brave ones. Most reasonable people, I think, would be very impressed if 10,000 soldiers could beat 135,000, okay? Most of them might even call that a miracle. But the Lord didn't want there to be any question. He wanted the glory that rightly belonged to him. That number had to be reduced even more, far more. The men who lapped the water like dogs, the idea is that the water would be brought into their mouth. So they would cup the water with their hands and then drank it. The rest of their men dipped their heads directly into the water, much like this young man in the following picture. You see here. I just wanted to see if I could trigger him. Yes, this is Isaiah. Thank you for demonstrating, son. Just for a little, I included this at my son's expense. Obviously, you don't need a picture to illustrate what it looks like when someone dunks their head in the water. The little context, this is under the bridge of Slagotchin on the Isle of Skye, and there's this old Scottish myth that if you dip your head in this water, that the fairies on the Isle of Skye would give you beauty for the rest of your life. Now,
obviously
I was actually gonna, it's funny you said that, so I was gonna say, I'm not sure if it worked on me because beautiful before and it seems to be working now. So, yeah, I tried it too. But I just thought that was just kind of a fun illustration. But the people who did that, what this young man is doing right here, yeah, they weren't chosen. And you know what? We don't need to read into why. Because people try. Oh, the men, I've heard all kind of explanations, as if it was more civilized to cup the water, so they would be the better soldiers. No, we don't need to think of any reason. It was just that they were the lesser number. In fact, I've actually wondered sometimes, what would I have done? You don't know ahead of time. Remember, Gideon just brought him down to drink, and he's observing who does what. And you know what? It would just be what mood I was in. I've been out in the forest, and it just matters on what mood, whether I put my head or cup when I drink out of a stream. Now, in the modern age, I'd have like my wife or my mom be like, oh, you shouldn't drink that water, you're gonna get sick. But no, so I don't know. In any case, I don't think there's any relevance to it other than that the Lord knew that a minority would do one, and then that would be the number he chose. All right, verses 6 through 8. Now the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men, but all the rest of the people kneeled to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped, and will give the Midianites into your hands. So let all the other people go, each man to his home. So the 300 men took the people's provisions and their trumpets into their hands. And Gideon sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent, but retained the 300 men. And the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. The 10,000 men were reduced to everyone who drank water with their hands, which was just 300. So a fairly small percent of that initial 10,000. God knew and preordained how each person would drink. All right? Remember, he didn't say which one he was going to choose. So that must have been part of his plan, because he knew it wouldn't be some 50-50. He wanted to get that tiny minority. At the same time, let me ask you, do you think the men made a choice which way they would drink? Yeah, I think so. But God preordained it. That means that God was in control, but he allowed men to make the choice, even though he sovereignly controlled their choice, because both are true. You don't have to choose either one. To pull that off, though, you'd have to be God, right? To let men make choice, and then that was always what you wanted to happen, you'd have to be God, but that's what happens here. So keep that in mind when you see these big theological questions. We have fun examples like this, where both are true. God is sovereign, and men are making choices, and he's incorporating them. Just 300 men would now face 135,000. For them to win, that would be a miracle. And that's the point. Now, doubtless, some of you history scholars are going, wait, but Leonidas defeated the Spartans with 300 men. And, defeated the Persians. They were Spartans. The 300 Spartans defeated the Persians' army, which was much larger. And that was not a miracle. Yeah, but they had a canyon and they wedged him in so they could fight him individually. And they had so this was a sort of a logistical victory. I'm not trying to downplay it, but there was a situation there that wasn't just a miracle. And some of you might go, wait, didn't the Alamo have 200 to 300 men? Yeah, and they lost. Yeah, I mean, they did really well for a long time. So are Leonidas and Davy Crockett and maybe Sam Houston, are they analogous to Gideon? Kind of. But look, this is out in the open, 300 men versus 135,000. That army versus this army. No tricks, no canyon. Well, tricks, yes. No canyon where they could wedge them in and fight them individually. And again, Alamo lost. So I only bring up those other two examples because someone might be thinking of them as a counterexample, but maybe you weren't at all and I didn't need to bring it up. Okay. Before Gideon took his men into battle, the Lord wanted to give him a little bit of encouragement. And that is how we should understand the next reading. He just wants to give him some confidence that he'll win. Let's read verses 9 through 14. This is actually our key passage. Now the same night it came about that the Lord said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hands. But if you are afraid to go down, go with Purah, your servant, down to the camp, and you will hear what they say. And afterward your hands will be strengthened, that you may go down against the camp." So he went with Purah his servant down to the outpost of the army that was in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east were lying in the valley, as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon came, behold, a man was relating a dream to his friend. And he said, "Behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread was tumbling into the camp of Midian, and it came to the tent and struck it, so that it fell, and turned it upside down, so that the tent lay flat." His friend replied, "This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand." The Lord had promised Gideon that he had given the camp of Midian to him. Gideon hadn't defeated Midian yet, but since the Lord promised it to Gideon, the defeat of Midian was as good as done. The Lord spoke as if it was done. "I've given it to your hand, it's yours." Indeed, to the Lord it had been done. To prove that to Gideon, though, to give him a little confidence, the Lord sent him on this fascinating scouting mission. We could be disappointed that God took his servant Purah with him, since it showed that his fear made him doubt the Lord's promise, right? The Lord said, "You can go, but if you're afraid, take your servant," right? And he takes his servant. But you know what, on the other hand, the Lord said that if Gideon was afraid, he could take him. So he's saying you can. It's not being disobedient. Gideon believed God's promise, but you know what? He also lived in this world. And we can be full of faith, but when we're facing real trials in this world, yes, we believe God and your promises, but I'm still facing this. I'm facing this great trial in my life. And so trials are just that. They can be very difficult. And Gideon didn't have God's power or God's perspective. So he was understandably afraid to sneak into the camp of an army filled with 135,000 people who wanted him dead. I can understand a little bit of trepidation, right? In this, we see how a godly man wasn't always fully confident. He wasn't always completely without fear. But he still obeyed, and that was courage. So I'm afraid to go, but I'm gonna go. So he showed some courage here. Now, we can do the same when we share the gospel or speak up for God's truth to a world of unbelievers, because that can be difficult, especially when you have some militant unbelievers. It can be scary even for some of us, but if we simply obey, then we can rest easy knowing that God's will be done in our lives. So we can be afraid, especially if a lot of people are mocking Jesus, but we just speak the truth. Something may happen, but don't worry about it. Jesus asked us to go forth and preach the gospel and make disciples, so we just need to obey, and then he will take care of the rest. And it's okay to feel a little bit of fear. That's all right. You don't have to be fearless, You just obey anyway. You just do it anyway. Now to that weird dream Gideon overheard one Midianite telling another. Just a quick reminder, in the dream, the man sees, he's in his camp, the Midianite camp, in the distance, a tumbling loaf of barley bread rolling towards the camp. And it hits one of the tents. And it hits it so hard that the tent flies up in the air, turns upside down, and smashes onto the ground, so much so that it's flattened. And by the way, these tents in the ancient Middle East, they're big. They're robust tents. They're not like a little camping tent. All right, these are serious tents that you would set up. These are no small thing. So that loaf of bread was serious, am I right? That's a serious loaf of barley bread. The Midianite who heard the story immediately interpreted it as a prophecy that the loaf was Gideon's sword, meaning his army, and that the dream meant that Israel would defeat Midian, knock them over, so to speak, flatten them. Now, to help you better envision the dream, the Hebrew word translated as loaf, it's actually only used one time in all of Scripture, and it seems to refer to a circle of barley bread. So you can see why they put loaf. I doubt it was like a circular disc, but I think it was the idea is like a boulder of barley crashing into a tent. Now that's strange, right? That's a weird dream. Now, many commentaries try to explain the meaning of the dream. Indeed, I think every commentary I checked on Judges said, here's the secret meaning of this dream. For example, the pulpit commentary says this. Let's keep that baby down. Of barley bread, and it says this, the commonest kind of bread, the food of only the poorer classes, indicating, therefore, the humble origin and station of Gideon. A tent, rather the tent. What in a Roman camp would be the praetorium, the general's tent. So it's arguing, the pulpit commentary is saying, the bread represents the poor, weak people, and this tent is the command tent. The words at the end of the verse are heaped up to indicate the total and entire upsetting and overthrow of the tent, symbolic of the rout and destruction of the Midianite host. Virtually every commentary says something along these lines. But you know what? I have a different take on it, almost entirely. Even Sigmund Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. And sometimes a dream is just a dream. Linda, I appreciate that you understood that. Yes, God used the dream, but I don't think that it was a prophecy. I think it was just a weird dream. Who here has had a weird dream? I've had weird dreams. Oh, my wife could tell you. I had a reoccurring dream about this little, there was a space heater along my wall in my parents' home. And I had this recurring dream for years that this little woman dressed as a ballerina with a baker's hat would come out of a heater at night and try to get me, try to stab me with a knife. And it was this reoccurring nightmare. And there were all these different scenarios where I'm trying to run from her. She's chasing me around. I don't think that was a prophecy. I just think that was a bizarre dream. There's no secret meaning. It's just a weird dream. That is a true story, though, by the way. I think that the man who interpreted the dream did so out of fear about what he thought was about to happen. That Gideon would come and defeat the army of Midian. In other words, one guy has a weird dream, the other guy hears it and he goes, oh my gosh, Gideon's going to kill us. Do you know why he interpreted that way? I think he's afraid, and he read into the dream what his fear already was. That's what I think. I think that this showed the mindset of the Midians. They weren't just a little afraid like Gideon was. They were full of fear. God used their fear and thus the interpretation of this weird dream, whether right or wrong, to encourage Gideon to take action. That's why I think when Gideon heard it, he was sure he would win. Remember, the Lord already told him, I've given it into your hands, right? But then when he hears the Midianites, I don't think he's convinced because he thinks the dream's a prophecy. I think he's convinced because he hears the weird dream and he goes, oh my gosh, they think it's a prophecy that I'm going to win. They must really be scared if they think that. Because it's just a silly dream about a piece of bread hitting a tent. That's my opinion. All right, verses 15 through 18. When Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed and worshiped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, for the Lord has given the camp of Midian into your hands." He divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them, with torches inside of pitchers. He said to them, "Look at me and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I and all who are with me blow the trumpet, then you shall also blow the trumpets all around the camp and say, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" Again, I don't think Gideon was convinced by the dream itself, but by the fearful reaction to it. Gideon knew that it was fear that would defeat the Midianites. And this is why I think he wanted his men to yell out, "For the Lord and for Gideon." It wasn't because Gideon was prideful. I really want to give him the benefit of the doubt. It was because he knew that the Midianites feared his personal arrival, and he wanted to exploit that fear, right? So if they're afraid of Gideon showing up, if a bunch of people go, "For the Lord and for Gideon," that plays into the fear. The 300 men were divided into companies. They were probably divided evenly, so 3 sets of 100 men. They're approaching the camp of the Midianites from different sides, so just imagine it that way. And again, they're covering their torches, right, with these clay pots, so they can't be seen coming. This made the men even more vulnerable, though, because they were split up, right? But their small numbers were irrelevant. It didn't matter. Verses 19 through 23. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. When the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and cried, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Each stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran, crying out as they fled. When they blew 300 trumpets, the Lord set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole army. And the army fled as far as Beth Shittah toward Zerah, as far as the edge of Abel Meholoha by Tabbatha. The men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all of Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. The time had come, Gideon's men were in place from different sides of the camp of Midian. Gideon's army, in unison, blew their trumpets, smashed the pitchers they were carrying, and then thus revealing their torches, making the fire easy to see. These combined events. So imagine, it's just dark. You're in your camp, right? Suddenly, on 3 different sides of your military, you hear a bunch of trumpets blow. There's sound coming from every direction. You hear pots smashing, and suddenly fire lights up on every side of you. And then you hear people yelling out, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." And they're all yelling it in unison from different directions. What might you think was happening? I think I'm surrounded by who knows how many thousands of people. And it's shocking too. It's scary. I can't see what's happening. It's a cacophony of loud and ominous sounds. And then the fire added a visual effect that brought terror even deeper into the hearts of the Midianites. So much so that they started to do what? Attack each other. Guess what fear does in war? Often does to an army. It causes what we call today friendly fire. I don't know what they call it with swords. Friendly slashing? I don't know. But that's the idea, right? They start attacking each other because they in the darkness see these lights that are probably look a lot closer than they are, as lights often do at night. They hear the sounds, and there might be some soldiers in the dark close to them. Out of fear, they think they're about to be killed. So they attack. And guess what I'm going to do, even if my own men are attacking me? I'm going to defend myself. And so this causes the Midianite army to start attacking each other because they're separated in different tents. So these different divisions of the Midianite army are, out of fear, start attacking one another. Verses 24 and 25. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against Midian and take the waters before them, as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan." So all of the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they took the waters as far as Beth-bara and the Jordan. They captured the 2 leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and they killed Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. Well, they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. The great army of the Midianites had been defeated, but now they were separated. There were still a lot of them alive. In fact, perhaps most of them. But now that they were separated and thus weakened, it was time for the Israelites to strike, lest they come back together and they figure out what happened. Midian's 2 leaders were Oreb, which means raven in Hebrew, and Zeb, which means wolf. Now, I'm not sure that's relevant. I just think it's cool. So, Midian's, and of course where they're killed, we see rock of Oreb, winepress of Zeb. That's because when this is written, those places are named after them. So, don't be confused by that. Now, those 2 leaders, Oreb and Zeb, after they were killed, their heads were brought to Gideon, sort of as proof that we killed their leaders and as sort of a victory, a trophy. Wow, I gotta say, it's this last passage they don't mention in children's Sunday school, do they? They usually stop the story before the beheading. So that's the adult. This is the adult version. So this can seem harsh, right? To bring the heads of their enemies back to Gideon. But the fact is, whoever curses Israel will be cursed. And so that certain curse fell upon Midian. And if you want some application, just look at Iran today. Don't try to attack and destroy the Jewish people. It may not be perfect, but God made promises to them. To conclude, Gideon's battle against the Midianites is fundamentally about 2 things. All glory going to God, that's first and foremost, and the need for us to depend on God. This tiny, seemingly inadequate army of Gideon proved that victory in our lives comes from the Lord, not from our own strength. Gideon was afraid at first, but the Lord graciously provided by allowing him to overhear a weird dream and a fearful interpretation of it. This bolstered his faith and his confidence. The unconventional strategy of the battle plan that Gideon came up with sort of defies the wisdom and logic of men. I mean, we know that it worked, but pretend you're back then. Would this plan work? I mean, if it doesn't work, you're in trouble. It forced the 300 to rely on God's guidance instead of their own wisdom. The victory of Gideon's army was really God's victory. True success in our lives, likewise, depends on the Lord's intervention, not on our own human effort. We do effort in order to obey and bring honor to Him. But our success is not rooted in that effort. It's rooted on relying on the Lord to help us and ultimately to do it for us. This especially includes salvation itself, which is wholly a work of the Lord. And then it includes our effort in sharing the gospel. We just need to trust fully in the Lord and then get out there and obey. And don't forget, there may be a world of darkness and sin out there, but by the power of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, it can be overcome by something as simple and as weird as a tumbling loaf of barley bread.